Friends, I just pressed the let's go live button, so let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet before we go ahead and jump into the program, because we got a lot to get to today. I mean, my goodness, they're changing the news on us right on the fly. And of course, we'll get into that as soon as we can make sure the connection is working. Does it look a little bit better today? I mean, yesterday it was like potato quality all over the interwebs. And that's curious why it's working today. Didn't really change anything, but it's working. So that's great. The good news is we can go ahead and get started. So let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense attorney at the R&R Law Group, located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, my friends, we're talking about the word snubbed. You can see we've got our old friend Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch the Turtle. He just got snubbed there by the Capitol Hill police. You know, they shook hands with a Democrat. You've got their Chuck Schumer, and they just walk right on by Cocaine Mitch, which is a big problem because the Democrats were the big defund the police people. There was a whole thing that took place there in Congress today. A bunch of bloviation from a bunch of fake charlatans who all they do is just give each other, you know, medals and awards, and they just they don't shake hands, and they do political charades all day long. So we'll talk about that story. But before we get in there, my goodness, Matt Taibbi, the individual who just published the Twitter files, has a supplemental file that literally just got published like an hour ago. All right. So obviously that changes the structure of the program, and which is okay. I mean, you know, thanks, Matt. I wasn't really interested in doing the show that I had prepped anyways, but whatever. I guess we'll just talk about all this stuff. But actually, it's very cool. So we'll go through that live. He's dropping the tweets in real time. After that, we'll see what the White House had to say about the Hunter Biden saga, because they say it's old news, it's a distraction, and they don't even care a whit about it. The Capitol Hill Power Rangers were there receiving their awards. And there was an interesting little clip that happened because we see that two people that we are very familiar with here, Michael Fanoni and Hunter Biden, were evidently at the same event at the Kennedy Center's honors, where they were, glad handing each other, patting each other on the back, like literally. Hunter Biden literally patting Michael Fanone on the back. Just outstanding. So we'll talk about that. We'll see some incredible news that James Baker, the guy who used to be at the FBI, where he was covering up for the Democrats before he left the FBI to go to Twitter to cover up for the Democrats. All of them it is blurry again. Now it's getting blurry again. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm trying to figure out why that is happening. And I was on with Restream support, and they said that there were no issues on their end. So let's see if we can diagnose this before we get into this whole program. It's not a bandwidth issue. I was on with Restream. They're like, no, everything looked great. What weird. It's clear on locals. All right. Well, we might have to see locals. We might have to drop off locals and stop the local stream and see if that clears it up. Because we're streaming to two places right now. We might have to try it. Because maybe Chrome is doing something interesting. All right, locals, let's try. Is it clearing up now? I can't tell. All right, so Rumble looks good, evidently. All right, anyways, well, we'll just keep on going. Twitter's getting better, they say. All right, so we'll just keep on going and see if this clears up. But all right, anyway, the interesting news is, of course, Jim Baker got fired. He's the guy who was over at Twitter, at the FBI before he went to Twitter. Everywhere he goes, he's just covering up for the Democrats. The whole thing is just disgusting. But we'll talk about him. There was a gold medal ceremony where McConnell actually got snubbed. So did Kevin McCarthy. These people really want to be liked. They want to go into, the the DC parties and be glad-handed, and they're not getting that in DC. Nancy Pelosi had an announcement. We also have Kevin McCarthy, who had an announcement, and we'll talk all about them. The January 6th Select Committee is making criminal referrals. They were hemming and hawing about this for some time, but now they have decided. Chairman Bennie Thompson said that they are going to tell the DOJ that these people are criminals and they must be prosecuted. And we can't wait to see what that looks like. We also have clip of Joe Biden. He was in Arizona today. Shout out to our state. But he didn't go and visit the border because he's not interested in solving those problems. He's interested in other things that are much more important, evidently. Yuma sheriff responded, and he's unhappy about that. He says we've got about 1,000 people coming across a day in Yuma in Arizona, which is a pretty small town relative to other places. Certainly don't have the same resources, that Martha's Vineyard does. But all right, so we've got that. And then in our second segment, or really our third segment now, since we've got the Twitter files to get into, we've got the Anthony Fauci deposition. This is something that hit yesterday, and it's a whopper of a document. If you see here, it's over 400 pages, I believe. And it was the full deposition. This was released by the attorney generals for Missouri and Louisiana. And we'll go through that. We've got some reaction from Rand Paul, reaction from Ted Cruz. People are wondering if anybody's going to be prosecuted or not. And the answer is probably not, but we'll go through it and dissect it all. Now, of course, if you want to be a part of the program, the best place to be is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Amazing community. Everybody is chatting away over there. Shout out to my friends. Matt's mom, Dana36G's in the house. Matt's mom says, yeah, Obama ruined it. They're talking about day trips and things. Yeah, Paul Mino's in the house. We've got Words Mean Things. _Tony's over there. Susanna777. Seawolf74's in the house. Also, shout out to our friends, Zach Nichols. They're wondering if the feds are trying to interfere with our tubes, which they very well may. But it looks like it's clearing up, so that's good news. But all right, watchingthewatchers.locals.com, an amazing place to be. But first, before we jump into all of our segments, let's hit the breaking news, shall we, and see what is going on. The Twitter Files Supplemental. We've got the second batch being dropped by Matt Taibbi, December 6th, 2:38 p.m., and boom, everybody is bracing for impact. What is next? Now, it's a supplemental, and in the law, supplementals are, they're kind of interesting. We need them. They're very important, but it's not the main report. It's not the main police report, or it's not even a part 2. It's just a supplemental. And we went through the entire original file when Matt Taibbi dropped them off previously, and let's see where he goes today. Matt says, on Friday, the first installment of the Twitter files were published here. We expected to publish more over the weekend. Many wondered why there was a delay. That's true. We did. But Matt says, we can now tell you part of the reason why. On Tuesday, Twitter Deputy General Counsel and former FBI General Counsel Jim Baker was fired. Among the reasons, vetting the first batch of the Twitter files without knowledge of new management. Oh! This is amazing. Okay, so just to catch everybody up on this, remember Jim Baker, before we can really understand the gravity of this. Jim Baker is this guy here. He was involved in the Michael Sussman trial that we covered in depth. We read through all the transcripts here on this channel. Baker, at the time, when Michael Sussman was trying to collude with the FBI to get Hillary Clinton elected, Jim Baker was working for the FBI. And Michael Sussman brought to this guy, who you see on your screen, the Trump PP tape, the Steele dossier, this fake hoax that was crafted by the Democrats in order to deviate Trump from success. They brought that through Michael Sussman, who was working at Perkins Coie, which is where Mark Elias worked before he left and started Democracy Docket. And they funneled all of this stuff through Fusion GPS, all to the FBI, right? It all went to this guy's desk through Michael Sussman. Now, it all turned out to be a hoax. Michael Sussman knew it was a hoax. He was part of the sort of collaboration, the creation of this thing. They were playing both sides of this. They would take one side to the media. They would sell it to the media. They'd go to the FBI. They'd say, oh, FBI, the media is investigating this. You better investigate it too. Then they'd reverse that and they'd go to the media and they'd say, oh, the FBI is investigating this. And now you should investigate it too. So they're playing both sides against each other. This guy was the lawyer for the FBI, general counsel. Right? They sat down one lawyer to another and they talked about this fake hoax, this created scheme that Trump was colluding with the Russians. Never happened. Okay. At the FBI. So keep that in mind. Put a pin in that. Now he is right. After he was working at the FBI and colluding with nefarious purposes to accomplish his goals, he left and went over to Twitter. And now we can see that he's caught up in the supplemental file. So Jim Baker, that guy, was fired. Among the reasons, vetting the first batch of the Twitter files without knowledge of Elon and crew. He's sneaking around, going through the records. Matt says the process for producing, quote, the Twitter files involved delivery to two journalists, Barry Weiss and me, via a lawyer close to new management, presuming that's not Jim Baker. However, after the initial batch, things became complicated. Over the weekend, while we both dealt with obstacles to new searches, it was Barry Weiss who discovered that the person in charge of releasing the files was someone named Jim. That's weird, Barry. She's sitting here going, rummaging through these documents. She goes, Jim Baker. Like, we knew who Jim Baker is. Jim Baker is this corrupt official who used to work at the FBI. I wonder... It can't be Jim Baker, could it? She calls, who is this Jim fellow who's going through all the Twitter files? When she called to ask Jim's last name, the answer came back, oh, that's Jim Baker. Yeah, he's on the 7th floor. Nice guy. He used to work at the FBI. Weiss says, my jaw hit the floor. The guy responsible for vetting the records at Twitter, the person responsible for making sure that there was no cover-up, was probably part of the cover-up in the first place. Unbelievable. So yeah, her jaw hit the floor, as many of yours are, as mine is. She says that, Matt continues, he says, the first batch of files both reporters received was marked Spectra Baker emails. This is what it looks like. Spectra Baker emails. Matt says Baker is a controversial figure. No kidding. He has been something of a Z-Lig of the FBI controversies dating back to 2016. From the Steele dossier to the Alpha server mess, right? That's Trump and the Yoda phones and all of that. He resigned in 2018 after an investigation into the leaks into the press, right? So this guy was communicating with all of his allies. He leaves the FBI, resigns, right? He's coming under scrutiny. And that's what happens with all of these corrupt bureaucrats, right? They all resign, they leave. They don't want to be called in front of Congress and asked a bunch of questions. That's ridiculous. So he resigns and he joins Twitter. Interesting. Covers up for the FBI, now covers up for Twitter. He goes over, he says that the news that Baker was reviewing the Twitter files surprised everyone involved, to say the least. Yeah. New Twitter chief Twit, Elon Musk, acted quickly to exit Baker on Tuesday. You're fired. Get the hell out of here. Taibbi says reporters resumed searches through Twitter files material, a lot of it today. The next installment of the Twitter files will appear via Barry Weiss. Now, of course, she is the editor over at Common Sense. She has an amazing Substack. She's head of a fan club and all sorts of other stuff. And so let's see if there's anything else from Matt. Nothing else from Matt, but you can see why there was a delay, because the person responsible for apparently vetting the files was very likely a part of the original cover-up and the corruption at the beginning. James Baker, that's your FBI right there, folks. That's the caliber of people that you're dealing with there. You've got Carrie Lake says, I wonder if Secretary Hobbs was talking to Baker. Look at this, just a little while ago. We've got Warnock. All right, so we've got some other election stuff. We've got investigations being launched. And all right, so that's more reaction there to the Taibbi supplemental report. And that's very, very interesting. Now we can see that Taibbi and them are working together. Barry Weiss, Matt Taibbi are working to explain what happened. Jim Baker was trying to vet the information before apparently it went public. He was trying to meddle in there, probably trying to delete his emails, going, ooh, yank, pull that one out. Ooh, pull that one out. Oh, pull that one out. Because if you remember, the original files had a letter from Jim Baker. And let's go just take a look at that while we're here. I mean, my goodness, this is so ridiculous. Baker was the subject of the original Twitter drop from Matt Taibbi the first time around. In his original thread, if we can find it, we can. It's this thread here, all the way at the top of one of Matt's threads. You can see literally an email from Jim Baker. There it is. This is in the first batch, Jim Baker. So in other words, Jim Baker is reviewing his own emails and vetting them before they're being published. What an insane conflict of interest. What a psycho. He says, this is what he said when he was trying to censor and cover up the Hunter Biden saga. Says, I support the conclusion that we need more facts to assess whether those were hacked materials. At this stage, however, it's reasonable for us to assume that they may have been hacked and that caution is warranted. Says there are some facts that indicate the materials may have been hacked, while there are others indicating that the computer was either abandoned or the owner consented to allow the repair shop to access it. He says we simply need more information. All right, so he's in Twitter trying to cover up for Hunter Biden. He's part of the actual Twitter files drops that Elon and co are publishing, and he is on the team. So you got to imagine, right, the next batches that are coming through, he's yanking anything that might make him look bad if he's in the original batch, right? Wow. Okay. Now, it's pretty obvious that in this email message, he's faking like he doesn't know what's on the laptop, right? Can you believe this for a second? This guy was just at the FBI, literally, right? This is in what, 2020? This is happening. He left in 2018, gets a job over at Twitter. Perfect. Basically the same entity at that time. One's a gigantic psyop that lies to America. The other is Twitter. And they are the fake conversation is about how can we find a justification to censor this laptop. Jim Baker, who's at the FBI, who knows very well, because the FBI probably had the laptop at sometime in late 2019. Many people say as early as October 2019. Okay, so Jim Baker maybe wasn't there at that time. Well, we'll put the timeline together, but you can see right here, they're sort of faking. He doesn't know whether it's real or not. It could be hacked. We don't know much about this. I saw a great tweet from this individual who said the following, and I thought it was great. His name is Jeff Carlson. He says, okay, perfect. He puts the timeline together. He's on Twitter. Make sure you go follow at Jeff Carlson. He says, Baker joined Twitter in June 2019, right? So he leaves 2018, FBI. The FBI had physical possession of Hunter's laptop since at least December 2019. So almost 11 months earlier, and they had seen it in July of 2019. So the FBI knew that the laptop was real. They knew it. There's no doubt about that. Now, Jim Baker is ex-FBI. And so the question is, in the time from 2018 to 2019 or whatever, when the FBI should have known that it was real, did Jim Baker know? And this gentleman, Jeff, says, with all of his FBI contacts, Baker had to know that as well. And I believe that totally, right? Because remember all the conversation, the back and forth between Michael Sussman and Jim Baker. These people were communicating in text messages. They were just showing up, going out to lunches, playing golf or whatever together. And they were doing business off the books. So are you telling me that Twitter hires Jim Baker and they say, hey, Jim, can you come over here, but don't bring any of your FBI contacts with you? We're just going to forget about that. We're going to bring you on as general counsel to Twitter now with all of your experience at the FBI because we think that you're probably very good at online computer programming stuff, counsel, right? No, bring all of your contacts with you. so that we can see everybody that you've been doing business with and get insider information about what the FBI knows. So this is saying that he lied to protect Biden. I think that's probably very true. Jim Jordan also posed the question, said FBI agent Timothy Tebow tried to shut down an avenue of the Hunter Biden investigation, which we've already talked about. Twitter then hires former FBI General Counsel Jim Baker, who helps give the company an excuse to suppress the story. Coordination? Yeah, you think? Yeah, obviously, right? It's just that they leave one sector and go into another sector. Baker is doing the protection racket inside the FBI. He can't do that anymore because he got busted. So he does the same protection racket over at Twitter, being paid by the same entities, which essentially is whatever the conglomerated Democratic National Party is. So that is another one from Jeff. Now, he ultimately was fired. Elon confirmed this, and shout out to Jonathan Turley, who does a lot of great legal analysis as well. He brought some of this to light, or at least Taibbi is, or Elon's responding to this article that was shared by Taibbi. Taibbi says, 6 degrees from James Baker, right? He's infested in everything. A familiar figure reemerges with the release of the Twitter files. Turley posted this previously in the New York Post. He says, as thousands of Twitter documents are released, much has been confirmed about the DNC's efforts to silence critics. Jim Baker, he's becoming the Kevin Bacon of Russian collusion scandals. He's been all over the place, right? He's been involved in all of the Trump collusion allegations. He testified at the Sussman trial, which is a trial that we covered in depth. He was forced out due to his role. He found himself under criminal investigation. He was a defender of the Russian investigations. The guy's just, he's an ex-FBI bureaucrat. So you can understand what type of individual we're dealing with. Elon says, in light of the concerns about Baker's possible role in the suppression of information important to public dialogue, he was exited from Twitter today. That's how Elon says fired. He was exited. It's a lot more neutral. A lot more passive. No. We didn't throw him out the window. No, he was exited through that pane of glass on the 7th floor. All right, so that is the update from Taibbi. Those are the supplementals. Now, let's see what Bari Weiss has to say for us here, because she's going to be dropping the next dump. She says, it's been quite a weekend. And that's it. So we've got nothing else for her. So she's going to drop those at some point. And that will be a lot of fun to dig into. So, of course, go make sure you're following Taibbi and Weiss and, of course, Elon if you're not already doing that. And yours truly if you're on Twitter, because we're sticking around a bit more on Twitter for our Twitter after parties when we do those. All right. And so you can see that's Jim Baker, who is now fired. He's no longer at the FBI or Twitter, which is all very good news. But the White House is responding to some of this. Now, Biden has been, kind of out of town, and he's been MIA. Karine Jean-Pierre hasn't been able to comment too much on the Twitter file drop. It was, it was a weekend. And Elon dropped those Twitter files on a Friday, which sort of made it hard for the media to respond to a lot of this stuff. And so now we're back in business. Now we get to hear from the White House. Hey, Karine, we've got a lot of questions for you. You know you've been gone a little bit. Did you see those Twitter files that Elon dropped? Is the White House prepared to comment?
Go ahead. Real fast, Karine, just real quick on Twitter, because you guys said you're keeping a close eye on Elon Musk's ownership, and it's the first time we've talked to you since you released the files a few days ago. Is it the White House view that decisions at Twitter were made appropriately in terms of decisions to censor this reporting ahead of the election?
You mischaracterized actually what I actually said and took it out of context when you asked her a question.
Okay, so what I want to do is, because of this response, let's listen to the question again. Okay, what did she say? If you can't hear the question that closely, I'll try to recreate it.
Go ahead.
Real fast, Karine, just real quick on Twitter, because you guys said you're keeping a close eye on Elon Musk's ownership, and it's the first time we've talked to you since you released the files a few days ago. Is it the White House view that decisions at Twitter were made appropriately in terms of decisions to censor this reporting ahead of the election?
You mischaracterized actually what I actually said and took it out of context when you asked her a question. Look, when I answered the question, and I actually already addressed this about how the White House and the administration is seeing what's happening on Twitter. We follow also what's going on, just like you guys are reporting and just like you guys are seeing. And what I was commenting to is like, yes, we're seeing what is happening, just like you all are seeing what's happening with Twitter. So just want to clear that up because you definitely mischaracterized what I said or put it out of context.
What is she talking about? The journalist asked her a question. She said, you said that you're closely monitoring Elon, right? And they all did say that. And Biden said that. He said, I think they should be looked into, and they're watching it. And she just said the same thing.
And so can you ask your question again?
Okay. So
yes, my question was that you had said, I think 6 or so days ago, that the White House was watching closely the situation at Twitter after Elon Musk's ownership of it with respect to misinformation. And because these files were released on the basis of, hack materials clause at Twitter, decisions were made to censor reporting leading up to the election. My question was, is it the White House view that these decisions were made appropriately in light of what has come out?
Which decisions? By whom?
By Twitter.
By Twitter on, okay.
Can you answer anything?
We see this as an interesting or a coincidence, if I may, that he would so haphazardly, Twitter would so haphazardly push this distraction. That is a full of old news, if you think about it. And at the same time, Twitter is facing very real and very serious questions about the rising volume of anger, hate, and anti-Semitism on their platform, and how they're letting it happen.
That might be one of the worst answers of all time from Karine that we've listened to on the show. I'm actually pretty surprised at how bad that answer was. So she doesn't answer it actually at all. She's offended by the question. She asks them to ask the same question again so that she can answer it. And then she doesn't answer it. She blames Elon for advancing a bunch of hate on the platform. And Karine is just kind of aghast that this is all old news. And it's a coincidence, by the way, that Elon would recklessly release this information coincidentally. To what? Coincidentally to what?
I see this as an interesting or a coincidence, if I may, that he would so haphazardly,
What's a coincidence?
Twitter would so haphazardly push this distraction.
You see how she changed that name? She went from he to Twitter. So she used Elon's name, kind of a thing. Elon did it. He haphazardly, he coincidentally, and then they, meaning Twitter, are the people who ultimately released it.
He would so haphazardly, Twitter would so haphazardly push this distraction. That is a full of old news, if you think about it. And at the same time, Twitter is facing very real and very serious questions.
It's not old news. Yeah, the fact that Hunter Biden's a crackhead and the fact that President Biden knew that and lied to all of us, that's all old news. Yeah, we did know that. It's disgusting that he lied to us all about it, but that's what he did. And the big story, of course, is that, the DNC was asking Twitter to censor private citizens. That's all new. I didn't know that was actually happening at Twitter, that they would send a list in from the Biden campaign, from your boss, Karine, that they would send a letter over to Twitter and say, hey, fellow liberals, can you help us out here? Here's a list of the people who we think should be removed. And Twitter just responded like a bunch of seals and said, yep, no problem, done. And that was unknown before. We knew that they were doing this, but we didn't see the inner workings of this because they kept it all under lock and key. Elon had to buy the company for $44 billion for us to see inside. But that's what's new. And she doesn't want to comment about any of that. So she transitions. She blames Elon for the increase in hate. And of course, I don't know how they quantify hate. It's a very amorphous word. They make it whatever is convenient for them in any given day. But if hate is criticism towards Democrats, towards people in her position, towards the gigantic Biden bureaucracy, well, yeah, people are pretty upset about it. I would imagine that the volume is in fact higher on Twitter because of what your campaign did and what we now know your administration has continued to do through continued liaisons with all of these big tech platforms to silence and suppress free and legitimate speech in this country. It's reprehensible. And that's probably why she's all bumbling all over herself, even more than usual. She can't assemble a sentence. I'm even having a difficult time now. She's rubbing off on me because the whole thing is ridiculous. She knows. Everybody knows this. They got caught. And she hates it.
Time, Twitter is facing very real and very serious questions about the rising volume of anger, hate, and anti-Semitism on their platform.
Anti-Semitism.
And how they're letting it happen.
All right. They're letting it happen on Twitter. It's all Elon's fault. They are letting it happen. They are continuing to release the files. That is certainly true. And so we'll talk more about Hunter because he showed up with a very interesting character over there in Washington, D.C. You see these two people? It's Hunter Biden literally patting this guy on the back. So we'll talk more about that right after we hear from our friends at 4patriots.com, the best food supply company on the whole planet. Because, as you know, a food shortage could be coming. Even here in the United States, experts have written about this as recently as July. We've got drought, we've got inflation, we've got new policies. They are really pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. And you can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits ever. This is not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years, super survival food, hand-packed right in family-owned facilities in the United States and giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, they stack easily, they have different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add water that's boiling, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com, use promo code Robert to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including this amazing 3-month survival food kit. Look at all this stuff that you get as part of that kit. Incredible. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order. Free shipping on anything over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. And so you can go to 4patriots.com, use code Robert to get 10% off your order and start building your stockpile today. All right, my friends. And so thank you to our friends at 4patriots.com. But now let's take a look at this very interesting appearance between Hunter and Michael Fanoni. Oh, you remember the Capitol Hill Power Rangers. These were the 4 individuals that the Democrats and really the Republicans were sort of enabling, parading around, bringing in front of Congress and symbolizing as the figureheads of the almost the end of America, right? The champions who saved us all from the end of democracy after Podium Guy almost ran out of there and took with him the nuclear codes or whatever, right? Very neatly assembled. It's sort of very demographically appropriate. We've got different characters and figures who will all sort of play different roles. One person is this guy right here in the middle. He's Michael Fanoni, however he says it, doesn't really matter. But he is an interesting character. Now, we've got a lot of questions about this guy. But you see him, right? He's part of this entire ensemble. They go around doing their little show for the Democrats. But they were there, and something interesting happened very recently. Of course, we're talking about Hunter Biden and the big media distraction that the Democrats say this is. But very conveniently, these two people were palling around. They were hanging out at the Kennedy Center Honors out there in Washington, D.C. This is the full photograph. You see Michael Fanoni with the neck tattoos. We've seen those before in many of his interviews. And Hunter Biden is there in his nice suit and tie, literally patting him on the back. Very nice, right? Very nice, literal support from Hunter Biden to Fanoni. So they are walking around, palling around. There's also a video of this. And it's kind of an interesting club. You know, once you get in there, once you say the right things, once you do the right things against the appropriate political parties, then all is forgiven. You know, you're sort of welcomed back into the club. You get to go to the same parties, the same cocktail events. It's a ton of fun. Oh, look who that is. Oh, it's Mr. Fanoni. Oh, it's Hunter Biden, literally walking back. I wonder what they're doing after the party. You know, where they're going, whatever they're up to. Who knows? But Hunter Biden, you know, I think he's got sort of a sugar daddy, some Hollywood director or something like that, who's like putting him up in a Malibu mansion. Maybe Fanoni can go back with him and they can tell war stories. Very, very interesting stuff. So the Power Ranger, you know, Capitol Hill police are all there getting things together, I guess. Now, they all got a bunch of awards. This was what the Capitol Hill police was celebrating today. You know, many people in the government sort of, we create different positions in the government. One of the key roles of government is to give each other awards and to sort of play patty cake with one another and to support each other with meaningless gifts and gratuities. The U.S. Capitol Police was very excited about this event today. They even published this on Twitter. They said, look, you can watch this here today at 11 a.m. Come take a look. The United States Capitol Police is honored and humbled to receive the Congressional Gold Medal for protecting members of Congress and the U.S. Capitol on J6. Today, we are also reminded of the bravery of D.C.'s Metro PD and first responders who helped defend democracy. And finally, we are incredibly grateful for the support of the police families, and the U.S. Capitol Police will continue to carry out our critical mission to protect the heart of America every day. All right. So I want to take a quick minute to separate, sort of two different entities who I think were a part of this entire day on January 6th. I definitely believe that there are good, heroic, honorable police officers there who are part of the Capitol Hill Police who were trying to live honorable lives and do good and protect the Capitol. I don't doubt that for a minute. I also believe that many of those same people were pawns in a much bigger operation. And them taking these gratuities, them taking these awards, is taking gratuity. It's taking an award from the very people who use them as pawns, who use them as political partisan tools for their own ill gains. And that's where I think there's a problem. Now, if they don't see that and they're, satisfied with their awards and their honors, fine. But I think the rest of us can see that this is a big masturbatory, self-congratulatory charade. Let's continue. They posted this on Twitter, very excited about it. They say it's about to start. Look at all of these beautiful gold tiered, plated invitations. A congressional gold medal ceremony in honor of the service and the sacrifice of those who protected the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. At the Rotunda, the United States Capitol, Tuesday, December 6. Beautiful photography of the ceiling of the building. We also have the coins that they're going to be getting. Commemorative gold coins. J6 2021. Memorialized in gold. We also see that the police on the other side, right, this is what it says, honoring the service and sacrifice of those who protected the Capitol. 1861 DC Metro Police. Beautiful. Now, this continues on. It says, follow this thread for the U.S. Capitol Police. Chief Thomas Manger's ceremony. And I'm honored, right? They detail the whole thing. Here's the scene from inside. Wow. Very incredible ceremony. All right. And so we're going to pause right there. I'm going to see if I can figure out what's going on with the potato quality stream. So locals, I'm going to try to close one of these browsers off. And so locals, I'm going to try yours because it's not in the restream thing. And I'm going to see if that helps in any way. So I apologize. We'll come back, locals, but I'm going to try to end this one. It may not fix anything, and I'll apologize for that. But we're going to try it just to see if I can diagnose what's going on, because I can't see from my end why it's bad. But all right. So long, locals. We'll be back in a bit. We'll see if that changes anything or clears anything up on our end. So we'll just let that ride for a minute. But okay, so Yeah, so I'm trying to also diagnose, CPU looks good. We've got memory looks good. Ethernet's good. Very interesting. All right, so we'll see if this solves anything. All right, so let's get right to it. Back to the Capitol Police. Okay, so one of the things that I also wanted to highlight was that, while we are listening to the horrors, the parade of horribles that have been sold to us for a very long time, the reality is a little bit different. This was an article from the New York Times back on July 12th, 2021. Okay, so this is still up in public. This is still a real story. It's online. And you can see it. It says, the scope of the violence can now be revealed. One officer lost the tip of his right index finger. Others were smashed in the head with baseball bats. A little more than a month after the siege, we have a full picture of the injuries. They call it one of the worst day of injuries for law enforcement in the U.S., right? Very, very dramatic. About 140 officers, 73 of them from the Capitol Police, and 65 from the Metro Police in Washington were all injured. 140 of them. Now, what were the major injuries? You can see they weren't anything that catastrophic. They ranged from bruises and lacerations to more serious damage like concussions, rib fractures, burns, and even a mild heart attack, right? So we had some lacerations, concussions, rib fractures, and a mild heart attack. All right, so not crimes. I see very minor broken bones, fractures, right? Nobody was head split open or injured for, on life support or anything like that we can see here. One Capitol Police officer, Brian Sicknick, was killed. That's a lie. Okay, so that's a big lie. We know that wasn't true. He was not killed. He died. Investigators are increasingly focused on whether chemical irritants were a factor in his death. Capitol Police said in a statement that he died from injuries sustained while physically engaging with protesters, right? All lies, all still on the New York Times, still there, right? All part of the official record. And it's basically a giant lie. So of all the injuries that they are highlighting for us, you see several of them are total lies. The number of those injured does not account for the dozens, if not hundreds of officers, they say, who are going to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. For doing their job, being used as pawns by the Democrats. At least 38 Capitol Police officers have tested positive for COVID. COVID also is a injury. So, right, those are the injuries. Those are the dangers that these people suffered. Nobody was killed. No cops were killed, right? That's not true. And they still are selling it like it is in fact true. So anyways, the point is the injuries were very minor. This whole ordeal was like a Super Bowl event, okay? Probably less serious than a wild Super Bowl. There are 900 criminal charges that you'll get over in any city over a very wild weekend, right? You have a NASCAR event come into your town, you're probably going to have 900 additional criminal charges in your city. Super Bowl comes into town, definitely 900 additional criminal charges, which is basically all that they've gotten out of the Capitol Hill riots. So it's all kind of a big gimmick and scam. But here's Nancy Pelosi indulging in the facade. Here's Nancy, who says, in a moment of solitude, thank you, Capitol Hill Police.
On behalf of the United States Congress and the American people, it is my honor to present the Congressional Gold Medal to the United States Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, and every hero of January 6th from every agent that responded that day. May this medal, the highest honor that Congress can bestow, serve as a token of our nation's deepest gratitude and respect. Not as full, but as a token. And in accepting this medal, you bring luster to this award, just as you bring luster to the Congress and the Constitution of the United States.
All right, so that's Nancy Pelosi, who's very excited about celebrating these heroes that she failed to protect. You remember, she's in charge of security of the House of Representatives, ultimately. She's the Speaker of the House. She has the House Sergeant at Arms, who's also supposed to be responsible for protecting the security of the House, and they have not done that. So she is part of the root problem on this, and she's going to now extract the benefits, the accolades, the spotlight of awarding these people a medal that they shouldn't have gotten, because this whole thing should have never happened. Okay, it should have never gotten that far, because they should have properly secured the facility. But they didn't. They wanted this whole thing to happen, so they allowed it to. Now, for some reason, the Republicans are so stupid that they continually think that they're going to, if they play nice with the Democrats, that they're going to get the same benefits. But they are, they're playing the same game, and they keep losing time and time again. You'll notice Mitch McConnell here, very excited to shake some hands of some fine officers. Republicans have supported police for a long time, right? It's always about funding the police, support our officers. We're the party of law and order. The Democrats want to defund the police. They're the people who say that all cops are bad and so on and so forth. So you'd expect the Capitol Hill police officers, the people who are there part of the law enforcement team, to shake the Republicans' hands. No, I mean, at least they don't want to defund them. No, that's not how that worked. Mitch McConnell gets snubbed. So does Kevin McCarthy, because these people are not individuals interested in anything but partisan political hackery. There it is. Chuck Schumer, here you go. Okay, hands over the award. Chuck knows he's getting a handshake. He's like, oh, this whole deal's been set up already. All right. Now here, go ahead and shake McConnell's hand. Nope. Don't even think about it. How about you, madam? She looks nice. Nope. Not going to shake his hand either. How about you, sir? Nope. Walk right on by. Walk by McCarthy too. He doesn't even put his hand out. But McConnell is just sitting there. And look at his little face. I guess that's just how it is. That's all we can do. Not much else to say about it. So, okay, so I just texted Restream. I said, hey, my stream's acting up. What's going on? All right, so maybe he can take a look at it while we're here. But anyways, that's McConnell, who is obviously very excited. He wants to be part of the cool kids club. He's like, can I sit with you guys at this lunch table? Can I just come hang out with you guys, please? And they're like, no, get out of here, loser. Go do some more cocaine and come back when you've got some energy. But it is something that the Republicans are going to have to figure out. Now, Kevin McCarthy does the same shtick. He's very excited about being accepted into the in club. In order to be accepted in Washington, D.C., you've got to condemn J6, no matter what the reality says. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. Doesn't matter if they should have secured the building. Doesn't matter if the FBI was complicit or our intelligence agencies are totally incompetent. None of it matters. It's all part of the glory facade, the giant charade. Here's McCarthy playing along.
Today we pay tribute to their service and sacrifice on January 6th. These brave men and women in uniform stood strong in the line of duty for our country, and we're forever grateful for that. This Congressional Gold Medal commemorates their courage, professionalism, and patriotism. There's no more fitting place to show our gratitude than the rotunda of the Capitol, a room that is a symbol of a sacred building, a symbol of a great nation, a symbol of freedom and self-government here and around the world. The Capitol Police and D.C. Police are valued members of this community, but they're also members of another community, the community of law enforcement, the brotherhood of law enforcement. By awarding them the Congressional Gold Medal, we're not only honoring them for protecting our nation and community on January 6th, but we're honoring them for the essential brotherhood as well.
All right. So that's McCarthy. And he is, of course, playing the game as he does. He's got to go out there and give a little spiel, which, of course, he's doing. So, all right. So I'm going to try switching over to something else to see if I can fix this this issue with the connectivity. We're going to see if this does anything here. So we might hopefully we don't lose the stream. But I want to see if I don't know why the stream is so bad, in other words, is what I'm saying. One second. YouTube stream is not, no, it looks terrible, doesn't it? YouTube stream's pretty bad. No, the stream, the quality's bad. And I don't really know why. I'm going to try something. If I lose you, I'll be back. But I hopefully don't lose you. All right, so we just swapped over to something else. Crap. Okay. Are we working here at all? We're trying to see if it's connecting again. All right. It's looking a little bit better now today. All right. Better? All right. So we're trying to get this thing situated here. All right. All right. All right. Sorry, everybody. Okay. It's coming back in business. So let's get back to it, shall we? All right. So we were leaving off with a conversation about Kevin McCarthy. And of course, Kevin McCarthy is a big, he's playing the game as he likes to play it, but we'll see where that goes. Now, we've also got the January 6th Select Committee to get back into the coverage of the story. CNN is telling us that the January 6th Select Committee now has decided to make criminal referrals. And we've had a lot of questions about this for some time, wondering whether or not they were going to do that. They were, of course, going to just write a big report that they wanted us all to read that was going to be very one-sided, that Liz Cheney was going to sell us in preparation for running for office. The House Select Committee investigating the attack has decided to make the criminal referrals over to the DOJ. Bennie Thompson said this. A Mississippi Democrat said that they have not narrowed down the universe of individuals who may be referred, but asked whether Thompson believed that any witnesses perjured themselves. He says, yep, that's part of the discussion. When the panel makes referrals, Thompson said it's going to be a separate document from the final report. Select Committee confirmed to CNN that criminal referrals will be considered part of the final part of the panel's work. Yeah, saying the committee has determined that referrals outside entities should be considered as final part of its work. A Democrat, Jamie Raskin, Adam Schiff, and Zoe Lofgren Liz Cheney and Vice Chair, all trained lawyers, all are on the subcommittee. They all want more prosecutions, not less. Here, the idea of a criminal referral of Trump, even if entirely symbolic in nature, has hung like a shadow over the panel, and they've got to do that in order to complete their work, which they will, right? The committee, if they don't have a criminal referral for Trump, what was the point of the committee? Do you think that they can ever live with themselves if they don't do that? No, of course not. So they've got to make sure that they can get that criminal referral in. So we've got a lot of activity. The J6, Capitol Police were there getting their gold medals, very excited about being honored, even though that they were used as pawns. We have the Capitol Police. Karine says that there's nothing even to consider about Hunter Biden, much ado about nothing. We're all wondering what Joe Biden has to say about this stuff. But of course, he doesn't say much of anything. Biden was visiting the border in Arizona. Shout out to Arizona. And he didn't even go and visit the border, which is insane because it's the biggest issue in Arizona and arguably one of the biggest issues in the country. And Biden didn't even bother. Why not?
Why go to a border state and not visit the border?
Because there's more important thing going on. They're going to invest billions of dollars in a new enterprise.
Mr. President, the power outages in North Carolina.
I don't know.
Do you have any idea who's behind it?
No, we don't yet. I'm running that down. I got a brief this morning.
Mr. President, you have to reject the marriage act. It's an armed religious freedom. That's sufficient. What's your response to that?
I disagree.
Can't go to the border. Things are very busy. He's got a lot of other very important stuff to attend to. And it's just, it's really not in his wheelhouse to get the time set aside to go and visit the border. So that's our president. Now, what he's doing in Arizona, doing more important things, I have no idea. Yuma, the sheriff in Yuma, is saying this is kind of a big miss. Yuma is a town in Arizona right near the border, right on the border of Arizona and California as well. And this is the Yuma sheriff saying, we have a major catastrophe happening right there.
It's kind of a shame. It's something that we're not surprised at, is this administration intellectually avoiding their main responsibility, and that's to serve the citizens of the United States and not cater to those from other countries, and just basically ignore the rule of law. If they were to see what was going on, then he would have to take action. It would be demanded of him to take action and to be responsible to those that he serves. So if he's not down here, then he can't be held accountable,
Exactly.
I guess, is their way of thinking. It's unfortunate. We're still averaging about 900 to 950 a day. It's a shame. I mean, how else do you put it? We're a lot of people are getting numb to the fact that this administration is not going to step up and do their job.
Yeah, it's a very big shame. They just don't care. The border is wide open, and Joe Biden is much more interested in, climate change or something. But that, of course, is the update on the Twitter files. We know that the supplemental just came out from Matt Taibbi. We know that the Congress, both sides of this, McConnell, McCarthy, Pelosi, the Power Ranger, Capitol Hill Police, all of them very excited about their Saving America, even though, they essentially arguably orchestrated the whole thing. So we'll continue to cover it, of course. Thank you for liking and following us wherever it is you're watching this, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, my friends. And so changing gears a little bit, we're talking about Fauci, the big liar. Now, he sat down for a deposition in the lawsuit brought by Missouri and Louisiana, suing the government for their big tech collusion. We're going to go through the full deposition. We have it here. It's over 450 pages. We're not going to read the whole deposition, obviously, but we are going to see some of the highlights. And as you could probably expect, Fauci's going to have a lot of I don't knows, and I wasn't familiar, and I wasn't there, and that wasn't my responsibility, and I can't talk about that. I'm not privy to that information, and blah, blah, blah. But we're still going to go through it just for posterity's sake. But before we get there, you see that this is Fauci, And he's asked a question when he's sitting down with the Washington Post. Of course, Yasmin from the Washington Post asked Dr. Anthony Fauci, "Hey, doctor, you were involved in a lot of COVID things. Do you wish you could kind of do anything over again, or was everything that you did perfect?"
First, I want to ask you, is there a moment of your career that you wish you could do over?
No.
No. Yasmin, no.
Nope.
And I know people are going to respond to that, who say, well, what does he think? He's perfect. Absolutely. I'm the first to admit I'm far from perfect. But when you say do over, I really can't see something that I would do completely over.
Wouldn't do it over because everything was done pretty much exactly right and by the book. Now, a lot of people disagree with that. We're going to hear from Rand Paul. We're also going to hear from Ted Cruz in a minute. Right after we go through the actual deposition itself, we've got reaction from others. And so let's take a look at what they have drafted here. These lawsuits brought by Missouri and Louisiana. The complaint was filed, depositions were scheduled, and they were completed. Dr. Anthony Fauci sat down for a recorded deposition on November 23rd, 2022. It is a 446-page document, a big one. And it is a full deposition, right? They sat down probably for 8 hours. Let's see what it looks like. This is the state of Missouri versus Joe Biden Jr. Everybody else is involved, including Psaki and others. It's a videotaped deposition, Dr. Fauci, done in Maryland. He's sworn, done at 8:08 a.m. Stenographer's name is Stephanie Barnes. Shout out to Stephanie. It goes as follows. You see that there are several appearances. The attorneys from Missouri are there, and the attorneys for Louisiana are also there. We've got lawyers from the Civil Liberties Alliance and a bunch of different lawyers all making their appearances. Different exhibits are articulated here, categorized for us. Let's get into it. The deposition of Fauci starts. The videographer is there, turns on the camera, and says, "Okay, everybody, we are now on the record." Today is November 23rd, 2022. The time is 8:08 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is the video deposition of Dr. Anthony Fauci, taken in the matter of state versus Missouri. It's a pending matter before Louisiana court. My name is so-and-so. This is Stephanie Barnes. She's going to be recording this. Counsel, would you please introduce yourself? Asking the lawyers to jump in here. Mr. Sauer stands up and says, "Yep, I'm from the U.S. Attorney General's office," and they administer an oath. They say, "Will the court reporter please administer the oath?" And so Dr. Anthony Fauci, he's been through this game before. He takes the stand, or he's at a table, so he just probably stands and puts his hand up, and says, whereupon Dr. Anthony Fauci was called, they swear him in. That is noted for the record. Got it. Attorney General says, "Good morning. Can you please state your name for the record, loser?" He says, "Yeah, my name is Anthony S. Fauci. And what's your current position, Fauci?" "Well, I'm the director of the NIAID. And when did you become this position?" He says, "Well, right after the inauguration of the president." "And how long you been doing that?" 38 years. "You ever given a deposition before, Fauci?" "Yeah, many times." How many times?" "Oh, just once." I don't know how long ago it was. Something like 15 to 20 years ago." "Okay, well, that's great. Can we go over some ground rules with you, doctor?" He says, "Yeah, sure." "Okay, first of all, when I ask a question, you and I better be careful not to interrupt each other. Got that?" "Yeah, certainly I do." "And if I ask a question and you don't understand the question, could you ask me to clarify that, to do that? Can you do that today?" "Certainly," says Fauci. "And can you give me verbal answers instead of saying, yeah, and shaking your head? Can you do that, doctor?" "Yes." "And I'm going to get everything transcribed and you're on camera and we're going to blast this all over the internet. You okay with that?" "I will certainly do that so I can speak clearly." "Okay." So the attorney says, "Well, I'd like to start off by handing you a document that I've asked the court reporter to mark as Exhibit 1. And I just want to can you take a glance at this and see if you recognize it?" So, counsel, this is a standing objection, says the other lawyer. He says, all right, I'm just going to object right here before you even show that document. The opposing lawyer says, all right, that's it. Objection for everything you show. I would ask that you preference your questions to the extent that Dr. Fauci recognizes it outside of the capacity of preparation for the deposition. Otherwise, I would object on worked product grounds. But if you're asking if you recognize a document outside of anything, I will not prevent him from answering. Okay, you raise a good point. Okay. So they say, let me back up a little bit. Did you review any documents today? He says, yeah, we did review a couple of those. I object on work product grounds, and I instruct the witness not to answer, right? Because this is Dr. Fauci meeting with his lawyers, and the lawyers are saying, that's our business, bro. You can't talk about that. This is attorney-client privilege. Sit back down. Don't even ask those questions. So then the states respond. They say, all right. So Fauci doesn't answer. He says, can you look at that document in front of you there, Fauci? Yeah. He says, so let me take he said, be careful. I read it, recognize it. Okay. Well, let me ask you this, doctor. In 2011, did you co-author an op-ed with Francis Collins in the WAPO called A Flu Virus Risk Worth Taking? And Fauci's like, well, I have it in front of me here and it has my name on it. So, yeah, it looks like I did co-author an editorial in the Washington Post on December 30th, 2011. Wow. Do you remember doing it, or do you only remember because you see it right here? He says, no, I vaguely remember. This was about 11 years ago. I've written over 1,300 articles over my last several years. And he says, okay, that's great. Very impressive. You look at the final paragraph on the first page of the first page here. It says, underline, it says, given these uncertainties, important information and insights can come from generating a potentially dangerous virus in a lab. Do you see that? You see where you wrote that in that article? You remember writing that? And the defense lawyer says, counsel, I would ask for Dr. Fauci to have an opportunity to familiarize himself with the document, all right? So the other side's like trying to slow this puppy up, right? They're going to be objecting. He's like going down a mountain here on skis, and the other side is trying to stop it. Prior to answering, witness says, yeah, prior to answering questions about it. Okay, let me just read it and see. So Fauci's rummaging through the documents. Oh, rummaging through. Let me see. So the states say, let me ask you a question unrelated to the document. Just a general question. Do you believe as you sit here today that important information, insights can come from generating a potentially dangerous virus in a lab, right? Like, do you think just as a general rule, forget your article, do you think just in general that it's a good idea or you could get valuable data? He says, well, yeah, I mean, if you take into the correct context, because when you say generating a potentially dangerous virus in a lab, that's usually in the context of, taking H1, studying it different ways, very strict conditions. And if you look in the context of this paper, at that point, Collins, Label, and I were making that there is a risk that we're talking about with the pandemic influenza, and to understand that as best as possible, we say, understanding the biology of the virus transmission helps us prevent. And the point we're making in this article is that there is a risk benefit to research like this. Yeah, we do. Yeah, he says, yeah, no problem. The point we're making, it says a lot of risk worth taking if the benefit is the protection of the American and global public, right? So he's owning it big time. Question is, and you refer to conditions under which research should be done, right? So you say like there's sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. Is that right? Yes. And when you're generating potentially dangerous viruses, right? Yeah. Okay, so first of all, is that kind of research generally referred to as gain of function research? Doctor? He says gain of function is a very potentially misleading terminology. Here we go. And that was one of the reasons why several years ago, outside groups, not the NIH, he says, made the determination that they would much more strictly define the guardrails of experiments that would require additional oversight and did away with the terminology gain of function because it can be very confusing and misleading. Yeah. Yeah. Especially now after it has wrecked the planet. Now, what was the terminology gain of function? When was it done away with? He says, well, at the time, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but there was a period of time, I think, between 2011, 2014, or 2012, 2014. I'm not sure when there was a pause put on research that was related to the manipulation of the influenza virus. He says, do those guardrails concrete more definitive guidelines about what the guardrails of this research should be? Okay, so he's talking about an article. The article has some guardrails on it. Do those guardrails include things like biosafety, biosafety levels for different entities, like different research locations. And he says, yeah, NIH, all these policies are in place. And the reason for that lack of clarity on terminology, which is confusing. So it felt like these outside groups needed to be clear. He says, okay, so let me show you another exhibit, Exhibit 2. This is a document called Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus. Are you familiar with this project title? Fauci says, I'm vaguely familiar with the fact that EcoHealth Alliance has been doing research on trying to understand bat coronavirus. And this project, it was initiated in 2014. Fauci says, I don't know. That's not something I would have followed very carefully. Oh, he wouldn't have followed it. Yeah. Now, would you have approved of this in your capacity at the NIAID? Fauci starts saying, I do. And his defense lawyer shouts, objection. Shuts Fauci up. Don't even keep speaking. Would you have approved this at your capacity? Objection, assuming evidence not in the record. Okay, so the objection will be noted, but the question can be answered. Says, go ahead, you can answer that. Thanks for your objection. Go ahead, answer. Says, I do not individually approve grants, says Fauci. No, so other underlings do it. Gives him a nice sense of plausible deniability. They go through multiple levels of peer review, so I would not have, by the standard way things work, have seen this, read it, or individually approved it. That's not the way things work at the Institute. Okay, this is the same thing a lot of cops do. Cops do this all the time. No. Are you sure your radar device was working? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I don't maintain it. I don't test it. I don't do anything with it. They do sort of routine startup and shut down functional tests, but no, it all goes off to somebody else who does all the mechanical work on it. So I don't do anything of it, right? It's shifting blame to somebody else. Now, do you have any recollection of this at the time? Nope, sure don't. Don't have any recollection of it at all. If you flip to the second page under details, it says EcoHealth. You referred to that a second ago, the recipient of the project, right? Is that right? Yeah. And that's your understanding. They did get funds for this project. Objection. Assuming evidence not in the record. Go ahead and answer, Fauci. Says, I'm sorry, would you repeat the question? I don't even understand what you just asked. So the lawyer says, all right, gosh, you're a doctor. Get it together. He says, is it your understanding that EcoHealth Alliance received funding from the NIAID under this project? Yes or no? Fauci says, well, looking at this, I can't make that connection. I do know, with all of the activity that's been going on with EcoHealth and NIAID, that indeed NIAID has funded EcoHealth. I don't know if I can specifically link it to this particular grant because this is the first time I've seen this piece of paper. Lawyer says, gotcha. Okay, above that, it lists a man called Peter Daszak. How do you say his name if you know? He says, I'm not sure who that is. I think it's Daszak. Yeah, I think so. How do you know Mr. Daszak? He says, well, I've met him once or twice. I would not characterize him as an acquaintance. In what connection have you met? And he says, I don't even remember meeting him, to be honest. But I do know that someone showed me a picture at a meeting where somebody said, here, take a picture with him. And so I clearly must have met him because there's a photograph, I believe, of he and I. He just got a photo. Okay. But that is not unusual. When you go to a scientific meeting, you run into hundreds of people. And I believe Daszak is one of the people that I did run into him because I believe I've seen a photograph of he and I together at a meeting. And he's not somebody that I would have had a major amount of. I think someone in one of 1,000 emails of mine that would have forwarded or showed me. Okay. I don't remember the content. I don't remember the guy, right? On the same page below Daszak, there's a reference to NIAID. It also says in this document that there's a grant. It looks like the grant is from the 1st of June of 2014 to May 31st, 2019. Do you see that, Fauci? He says, yeah, it says budget start 1st of June, budget end. Is that what you're talking about? He says, yeah, over there on the right. Yeah. Says, did you later become aware that not at any time that NIAID was funding this project? Objection. What's the question? He says, look, did you at any time later become aware that the NIAID was funding this project, understanding the risk of bat coronavirus emergence? Fauci, I became aware of this after all of the attention was put on it. following the early part of January, February, mid-March of 2020. But I certainly was not aware. Well, I wouldn't say certainly, because who knows what came across my desk. He's just so busy. Thousands of pieces of paper come across my desk. So how could I be responsible for one gain-of-function Wuhan, Post-it note? But I do not recall at all being aware of the existence of this grant at the time that it was initially funded. So the lawyer says, for the states, says, okay, look, if you go to the first page in the abstract text, you see that big paragraph that covers most of that? Yeah. Go to the very bottom of that last couple of sentences. You see where it says, test predictions of COV interspecies transmission. You see that? Fauci says, hold on, what line is this? What line from the bottom are you talking up? He says, fourth line from the bottom. Jeez. He says, oh, I got it. Take it. Okay, test predictions of COV. Got it. Test predictions, Fauci starts reading. Predictive models of post strains will be tested experimentally using reverse genetics. Yeah. He says, oh, okay. Hey, Fauci, what does reverse genetics refer to in that line from that grant? Objection! Fauci says, I'm not really quite sure what they're referring to. Reverse genetics can mean many things, like manipulation of a virus, recombination, things like that. I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to here. Okay, can it refer to what you were talking about a minute ago that you talked about in a 2011 op-ed about a dangerous lab? Can reverse genetics refer to that? Does it encompass all of that other gain of function stuff? Objection, calls for speculation. Fauci, of course, answers, says, yeah, it could. Yeah. Reverse genetics is a very, very broad term that could have multiple applications. The influenza vaccine that I hope you were vaccinated with this year. Oh, gosh, this guy. Are you kidding me? In the middle of a depot? This guy's selling flu shots in the middle of his deposition. He probably knows we're going to be reading this. We're advertising for Fauci. He says the influenza virus vaccine that I hope you were vaccinated with this year was likely produced by reverse genetics. They should have put parentheses in this. Can you believe this guy that I hope you were vaccinated with this year? This guy. So reverse genetics is a very broad categorization. So the state, he's rolling his eyes at this Looney Tune. He says, all right, can it refer to genetic manipulation of a virus in a way that renders it either more transmissible or virulent? He says, like I said, reverse genetics is a very broad terminology. It can mean manipulation of a virus. We do that when we create an attenuated influenza virus that I believe it can also be done by amplification of the virus. He says, okay, great. I've got another document for you. How about document 3? You recognize this? Objection comes from the defense. Fauci says, no, I don't recognize it as a document that I've seen before. But I'm put before me, tens of thousands of documents in my capacity. I'm aware of the concept of gain of function and other things. But let me ask you this. Can you go to the second page of that? At the top, it says, U.S. government gain of function, deliberative process and research funding pause. So Fauci, you referred earlier in your testimony to a period starting in 2014 where there was a pause of gain of function research. Do you remember that? He says, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. He says, well, let me ask you this. They're having issues. The court reporter says, if I could just ask counsel to slow down a little bit, there's an objection. They're talking over each other. They get off track. They come back. The state asks another question, says, all right, look, let's start this over. The question is, are you familiar with the U.S. government policy adopted in 2014, pausing gain of function research on certain viruses? Yes, I'm familiar with it. Good. Was there an exception to that policy, Fauci? Yes or no? It says right here, an exception. So obviously there was. And were you aware of that exception at the time? Fauci says, because it was adopted. He says either at the time it was adopted or sometime thereafter. And to my recollection, and again, this was 2014, so we're talking about 8 years ago. But my recollection is that the pause was for all research such as this until a new U.S. government policy could be developed. The states say, and was there an exception to that pause? that's set forth in the footnote? He says, yeah, the deliberations at the time were based on the need to continue certain critical research. That's an exception clause, and I'll read all of this through for you. Did you ever invoke that exception when you were the head of the government? So there's a pause on all gain of function. Did you use that exception? He says, yeah, I did. Did you ever invoke that exception during the years the pause was actually in place? Fauci says, as I recall, exceptions were given to a couple of experiments. Yeah. To my recollection, that does not usually rise up to the office of the director, which is me, but it's handled at the level of staff and deputy. So I don't recall. If you're taking shots at home, that's the phrase to keep. It's possible, though, I doubt it, but it's possible that a piece of paper that was the ultimate sign-off on an exception came to my desk. You see how he is waffling here? Because he doesn't want to be impeached. He doesn't want the lawyers to say, well, I've got your signature on this exception document, liar. So he's saying, I could have signed something, but I doubt it because I don't ever recall specifically ever seeing that piece of paper in front of me saying, quote, we're going to have an exception. Would you sign off on it? So he says, I'm not sure. It was 8 years ago. So they talk about more of the moratorium, projects related to EcoHealth. They talk about his deputy. Who is she? Dr. Hugh Auchincloss, principal deputy director. They ask about another article in Exhibit 4 about the pandemic or about the virus. Do you know who Ralph Barrick is? They ask. Not really, says Fauci. I know who he is. I doubt if I've ever met him. I may have met him at one of those meetings where there are thousands of scientists saying hi to each other, but I don't know who he is. He's a scientist at the university. I do know who he is. He's a scientist at the University of North Carolina. And he's funded by the NIAID? Yeah. But you don't ever remember meeting him, right? Fauci says, no, I don't recall. I could have met him. I could have run into several thousands of people, but I don't recall. I certainly don't have a relationship with him. Oh, what about this person? This person is called Zhengli Shi. You know who that is? And Fauci says, I believe, if I'm correct, this is the scientist who's at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I'm not 100% certain, and I sometimes get confused with Asian names, says Fauci. That's not very inclusive and diverse. But I believe this is the person who is a scientist at the Wuhan Institute. Yeah, and many people called her Bat Lady, right? Or Bat Woman. And you're generally aware that someone, oh, here it is, called Shi Zhengli, who's described in the media as Batwoman, right? Literally. Who does research there on bats at the coronavirus in the Wuhan lab. Fauci says, yeah, is that her? Whoa, that's funny. I don't know if that's the same person. Like I said, when you're dealing with Asian names, very racist. Sometimes the first name is the last and the last name is the first. And so I get nervous here with his racist rhetoric. I believe that the person is from Wuhan. Yeah, Fauci, better be careful there, buddy boy. You're about to get your ass canceled, boy. All right, he says, have you ever met that person? Says, no, to my knowledge, I haven't. I don't. I'm fairly certain I have not. I could possibly again. I may have run into her at one of the many scientific meetings that occur, but I don't specifically recall running into her. All right, well, can I direct your attention to the beginning of the pandemic, or at least the beginning of the outbreak? Do you remember when you first became aware that there was an outbreak of the vid in China? He says, yeah, it was either December 31st or the first couple of days of the new year of 2020, either like the 31st of 19 or 2019 or the first days of 2020. And do you recall at some point anybody raising concerns to you in January 2020 at the beginning of the outbreak or near the beginning of the outbreak that this puppy might have been genetically engineered or originated from a lab? Did you get any inside knowledge about that, doctor? Fauci says there was a phone call late January 2020, I believe. It came from Jeremy Farrar. There was one other person on the phone, I believe it was Christian Anderson, who piped me in on a three-way call saying that they looked at the virus and there was some concern about the molecular configuration or the makeup of the virus that made them think there was a possibility that there could have been some manipulation of the virus. Yeah. the furin cleavage sites that we saw. We talked a lot about these. Remember, we used the Frankenstein analysis. The COVID strain, it was analogized to Frankenstein. It looked like they cut the head off somebody else, or the Frankenstein's monster. Okay, I know. Cut the head off Frankenstein's monster and put it on something else, right? And that's kind of what the virus looked like. It's like, where'd they get this bit? And where'd they get that bit? And they just smashed it all together. Now, before that, had anyone raised a concern like that to you, Fauci? To my recollection, no. Well, how about Robert Redfield? Who's he? He's the director for the CDC prevention. Did he call you in January? He says, well, to my recollection, no. I know that Bob today talks about that, about the origin of the virus emanating from the lab. But I don't recall in January whether Bob was involved, whether he told us about any manipulation of the virus at all. Are you aware, Fauci, if there's any relationship between Daszak and she, Bat Lady, the two co-authors of the study that I showed you before? Did they work together? Do you know whether there is a working relationship, Fauci, between Bat Lady and Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance? Fauci says, well, I do know now. I didn't know it at the time, but I do know now that EcoHealth has a sub-award from their original grant that goes to Shi Zhengli of Wuhan. So from the NIAID, we're following the bouncing ball. NIAID over to Peter Daszak, EcoHealth Alliance, sub-award over to Shi Zhengli, works at Wuhan Lab of Virology. Fauci works at the NIAID, heads it up, which gave the original grant to EcoHealth Alliance. So he says, so they work together? And that's directly funded by the NIAID? Well, there you go. He says, the funding, it does go to EcoHealth, which awards the sub-award. And to my knowledge and recollection, it's a 5-year grant, somewhere between $500 and $600K. Do you know whether Peter Daszak has access to some of those same virus genomes that Bat Lady generated at Wuhan? He says, well, I want to make sure I'm giving you an accurate answer. He says, okay, let me ask the question again. Do you know, Dr. Fauci, whether Daszak had access or is in possession of data generated by Bat Lady to their research together, including genomes of the vid? Fauci says, I don't know absolutely for sure, but I would imagine that if Peter Daszak is collaborating scientifically with Shi Zhengli, that it is likely, given the norms of scientific collaboration, that he would have access to the data if they were indeed collaborating, which it looks like, from what I learned subsequently, that they are collaborators, since there is a sub-award to Wuhan that does go to Bat Lady. Would it be ordinary practice for someone in his position to have access to her awards? Fauci says, yep, that wouldn't be unusual at all. Can you take a look at this email marked Exhibit 5? Looks like there's an email someone sending to you and somebody named Jen Ruth. It's coming from somebody named Greg. Who's Greg Folkers? Oh, Fauci says, oh, Greg, we love Greg. He's a member of our inner office. He's my immediate chief of staff. And who's Jennifer? She's our communications staff. And how about below her? Well, all of the team, this is how they all make up the team. And it looks like there was an attachment on this email. It says that these are talking points for the NIAID director. That's you, right, Dr. Fauci? So it's a common thing for your chief of staff to prepare talking points or press appearances for you. And Fauci said, well, yeah, that would not be, not unusual. If I'm going to a meeting or Congress or whatever, subject was brought up, I want to be familiar with the talking points, and so I should know about it. Okay, that's great. That sounds like it's a pretty normal thing. No problem. If you look at the body of the email, it also says hyphen. You see that? Fauci says, no, I don't see it. Hold on. Where are we? He says, well, it's close to the top. Also, when talking about COVID, not necessarily in this venue. Do you see that? Fauci said, no, I'm sorry. I don't see it. He's like, oh, for the love of all. He says, as a placeholder. Okay. He said, all right. He says here, and Greg, Mr. Folkers says to you, we have on our team, and then in parentheses, these 3 people, Vincent, Daszak, Barrick, Lipkin, and others. Do you see that? Yes. Do you know what it means when he said that those people are on your team? Does he mean that you fund them if they're on your team? I think he means, and he says, I can't tell you because I'm just speculating here, but I don't recall this email from January 2020. I don't recall. There's another one. My speculation is that what Mr. Folkers was referring to were people that were in our group and that were colleagues of ours. I mean, Peter Daszak was already mentioned. He's a grantee. He already got money from us. Barrick's a grantee. He got money too. Lipkin's a scientist at Columbia. I believe Vincent, though I don't know, could possibly be Vincent Munster. He's a scientist at the NIAID too. All these people are involved. Now, 2 paragraphs down, continue reading, Doctor. It says that the NIAID has funded Peter's group, referring to Daszak, for the coronavirus in China for the past 5 years to understand the risk. And then there's the grant number. Do you see that email in your talking points? He says, yeah, I see that. And that, I take it, would be the grant that we referred to earlier in Exhibit 2 with the title Understanding the Risk of the Coronavirus. He says, I'm looking at Exhibit 2. The title is Understanding, and that's the grant number is 1R101. He said, okay, I don't need them to hear the grant numbers. That's fine. Can I just ask you, do you recall that grant being placed on your radar January 27, 2020? Because he got the talking points in an email, right? So he's aware of this. He says, well, based on this email, it looks like Mr. Folkers has at least mentioned it, but I wouldn't characterize that as being on my radar to the point of garnering my precise attention to it. You know, it just shows up in my talking points. It doesn't mean anything. Fauci says, well, let me finish reading the email. So a bunch of time goes by. The lawyers are like, oh gosh, this guy. All right, read faster. He finally brings his head back up. He says, it says that's now been renewed with a specific focus to identify cohorts of people exposed to VATS getting sick from COVID. He says Eric Stemmy's the program officer, and they're our collaborators at Wuhan. So Fauci says, yeah, I mean, look, I think that this was likely the situation where when the idea of an outbreak in China was brought up, or the vid, that my staff thought it would be important for me to understand the kind of things that we were doing. And I think the important sentence in here, which is relevant, is that the grant wanted to identify cohorts of people exposed to bats to see if there was spillover. I believe that's the intent of the talking points, not something else. So in other words, he's saying this doesn't look that great for Fauci, to be honest. Fauci's explaining what it means, but he just acknowledged the point that the lawyer is trying to make for the states is that you saw this, right? This is on your radar. You knew about it, and you lied about a bunch of this stuff after the fact. Questions continue. They say, I think you testified earlier, Fauci, about the time that you thought there may be concern about the origin story of COVID. He says, yeah, I believe that my recollection from a few years ago, because it's old, that's why that sentence is in there, my recollection from a few years ago, just to make sure you know it's a few years ago. That's when I first became aware of this concept and of the possibility of there being a manipulation of the virus. And do you remember what was said in that call? Says Jeremy, to my recollection, and on that call, Jeremy and Christian said that there may have been manipulation because it was an unusual virus. And on that call, I and others said, well, that being the case, we should bring together a group of highly qualified international evolutionary virologists to discuss the issue and to see what the way forward would be to try to clarify that. And that was the phone call that we arranged. And I believe for the following day, if I'm not mistaken, I think those are the dates. Who's Eddie Holmes? They ask Fauci. They say, well, he's an evolutionary virologist. He works in Australia. Did he receive funding from you? I don't know. Do you know Eddie Holmes? I don't know him personally, but he's another evolutionary virologist. How about Christian Anderson? He says, yeah, I know him too. I've spoken to him a few times. I believe the first time, and again, when you say, don't you know, remember, we all go to international meetings. There are thousands, hundreds of people there. He's an internationally renowned scientist. I believe the first time I actually spoke to him was some time ago. Do you know why he brought that concern to you in particular about possibly the virus being engineered? He says, I would imagine, since I am, with all due modesty, recognized as one of the top infectious disease people in the country and the director of major research, that Christian would have come to me and we would have talked about a lot of things. Since I'm generally considered a top government infectious disease person, that it would be appropriate to let me know what is on their minds. Other people were on the phone. Now, the lawyer chimes in here and he says, okay, look, that was a big list of stuff that you just talked about. Can I pause you for a second, Fauci? Sure. Lawyer says, all right, look, listen, doctor, this is a deposition, okay? I'm going to ask you questions, and I'm going to ask you to listen to the question, okay? He says, right. And answer the question that I'm asking, all right? And not go off on like a tangent. Fauci says, fine. Can you agree to do that, please? Fauci says, I would be happy to do that. And defense lawyer chimes in and says, and counsel, I would also ask you to let the witness provide context when he feels it's necessary. Sauer says, yeah. So let me direct your attention to the first page of Exhibit 6 right in front of you at the bottom of the page. It says that on January 31st, 2020 at 1847, you wrote an email to Jeremy and Christian saying, this came out today. You may have seen it. If not, it is of interest to the current discussion, correct? He says, well, you're very honorable, but go ahead. So there was something weird that happened here. Mr. Kirshner says something like, objection, Your Honor, not Your Honor. So maybe he said something like, You're honorable. Objection, Your Honorable. Objection, Your Honor. Weird. Anyways, Fauci says, well, you're very honorable anyways, but go ahead. Okay, so Sauer continues. Do you see this article? Is that a reference to this magazine Science article? Do you know why you would have said this article is relevant? He says, looking at the title of the article, which is Mining Genomes for Clues in the Outbreak, I'm not sure exactly why I would have sent it. I'm not sure what I was doing with that. Shortly later in the depo, they ask about this specific sentence. They say, immediately above this sentence, Dr. Anderson writes, the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome. So one has to look really closely at all of the sequences to see some of the features. And some of the features look potentially engineered. You see that, Fauci? He says, yeah. Does that sort of concern, was that raised to you earlier on that day, on Friday, January 31st? Fauci says, yeah, the answer is yes. He was referring to some unusual features, but if I might just take an extra 5 seconds, he says, it says the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome, and one has to look really closely, and that was the tone of the discussion. And just quickly referring to that last sentence in the second paragraph, when he was talking about inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, the next sentence says, but we have to look at this much more closely, so those opinions could still change. Now, they ask Fauci, they say, well, did you think that this was an alarming concern? I mean, he's saying that this could be a possibility. Did you think to look into that further? I think it was an interesting and important concern. And that was the reason why we all agreed it would be a very good idea to get a larger group of qualified virologists to look more closely and to take a quick look. Look over a period of a couple days to see if this concern was justified or if there could be another explanation for it. They look at some other documents. They go to the 8th page. They're rummaging through numbers, looking at bait stamps. 2432 is an inserted document. They go off the record and they take a brief break. There's a discussion off the record for 1 minute, 9:04 a.m. They have a conversation, back on 9:05. All right, Fauci, do you see the 8th page of this document? Yeah, it says, Hugh, it's essential that we speak. Yeah, at the top of that page, you sent this email to Hugh Auchincloss, correct? That's how you say his name, right? Auchincloss? He says, yeah. You sent it at 12:29 a.m. on Saturday, February 1st, didn't you? In the to email, there's a CC on that. You know who you CC'd on this email? Fauci says, no, I don't recall. Would you have CC'd one of your personnel email addresses? He says, no, I don't really often do that. I rarely do that. Have you ever done that? Have you ever CC'd your personal email on a work-related matter? I don't recall. I doubt that I did that. I doubt that. Do you see that there's an attachment listed on this email? Attachments. Do you see where it says et al. Nature magazine? SARS gain of function. You see that? You know that there was an attachment on this email? It's not included. He says, you know, it says SARS Barrick. It says it could possibly have been, I don't know for sure, Could have been something else. Look at these. A lot of I can't recall. I can't recall. I recall this earlier. I was referring to all those things look consistent. Do you know if you were the one who wrote the title describing that article? No, I don't recall. Shot. I'm not sure exactly why those words got in there. It was maybe something that was mentioned by Barrick. I don't really recall. Another one. Do you think that that article it refers to the gain of function, or do you not recall? I don't recall. There it is. Do you know why you attached that article to this email? Your principal deputy? I don't recall. You said it was essential to speak that morning, didn't you? Right. And so you wanted him, you said, keep your cell phone on, didn't you? Yep. Yeah, and the reason is that I wanted to know that we're going to have a phone call with a larger group of evolutionary virologists. This is the first time I've heard that we may or may not have been funding EcoHealth, and I wanted to get a better scope of what was going on. That's why I asked him that question. So they got Fauci freaking out over here, right? He's scrambling, getting all of these people on the phone to sort of shut them up on this potential lab leak theory. Tells Hugh, 12:39 a.m. on a Saturday. This is urgent. Did you call his cell phone that day? I don't know. I don't recall. Do you remember talking to him at all? I might have, but I don't recall. Later in the day, you said, read this paper, as well as the email that I would forward you now. What are the tasks that must be done today? Were you concerned at the time that the work you had funded might have led to the creation of the coronavirus? Good question there. Fauci, were you concerned at that time that the work you had funded in China might have led to the creation of the coronavirus? Fauci says, I wasn't concerned that it might have, but I didn't like the fact that I was completely in the dark, you like that little insertion there, about the totality of the work that were being done. And I was going into a phone call with a larger group of established scientists, and I wanted to have at my fingertips just what we were and were not doing. Now, in the call earlier that evening, had Christian Anderson or Jeremy Farrar raised this Nature medicine paper in any way? I don't recall. And how did you think of it? How did this at midnight affect your decision? I don't recall. Do you remember at all how this article got on your radar? I don't recall. And I think I showed you earlier the email. You remember that? I'm sorry, you were going pretty quickly. Let's move on. Your testimony, Fauci, is that you do not remember how you became aware of Xi, Barrick, and others. That's right. I don't recall. I mean, I became aware of it, but I don't really recall what specific day that was. So you see the floodgates have opened. All of the questions are now, I don't recall. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused with your question. So what is your question? Well, let me ask you this. Did you email Hugh Auchincloss? Yeah. Did you forward him this article? Yeah. I actually don't recall why I forwarded it to him. Oh, man, this guy, he's like one of the top virologists in the whole planet. He's an idiot. He can't remember anything. Did you forward him 2 articles, right? 12:29 a.m. Yeah. Do you know why you did that? I don't recall why I did that. I think I wanted him to be aware because the question that I was really getting at with him is that I want to find out what the scope of what we were doing in China, because they obviously called me up and said they had a concern about a virus. I wanted to make sure I knew everything that they were doing there. Do you remember? He says that was the purpose of my email. You remember talking to him about that? Do you remember talking to Hugh about your concern? He says, I don't remember talking to him, but I think somewhere it said, I'm going to call you somewhere. I don't recall speaking to him. I recognize the emails because, as I said, and I'll repeat, I was going to be on the phone call with a large group of people, very versed in the field. I was not familiar with these grants. Did you ever raise those grants in the phone calls? Do you remember any? Here's a great question. So a lot of I don't recalls. No, I don't recall bringing this up. In fact, what I did have is other information. It's not even my field, though. So the state lawyer asks him, all right, listen, dumb doctor, do you remember saying anything at all on that call? I may have said a few things, but I was relatively silent. Do you know what they were? Fauci says, what were? Now he's just being a jerk. I may have said a few things on the call, but I was relatively silent. Do you know what they were? What were? The things you said on the call. The things you may have said. No, I don't recall, but I certainly am not one of the people actively engaged in the discussion. Do you know who this person is? Lawrence Tabak. Yeah, at the time he was at the NIH. And now we're looking at other communications and this article. Do you remember a phone call that happened? No, I don't recall. It's in your official calendar. It says you've got a call with Jeremy Farrar at 2 p.m. that day. Would you dispute that? He says, you know, I don't recall when it was. I mean, if my calendar says it was at 2 p.m., then it likely was at 2 p.m. I don't recall. Shot. Was Tabak on that call? I don't believe so. I know that Francis Collins was, but I don't believe that Harry was. Would you send it to him so that he could give Francis Collins a call? I don't recall. Another, I don't recall. Did you do anything here? I don't believe so. More specifically, did you discuss anything with Francis Collins that day? I'm not exactly sure the point you're making. Doesn't matter. I'm just asking if you discussed the issue with Francis Collins. Did you talk to him at all about this? I don't recall. So this is basically how this is going. We are now at page 68 of 446. Can you turn to the next page? What's the time of that email? 5:51 in the afternoon. You respond to the email at 11:47 a.m. that morning. Okay, so like he's on this thing. And they get an objection. I'm asking you to identify what time you sent the email. Witness says, and that's what I was reading. And when you're telling me to read it out loud, so let's get it together here. So Fauci is now going back at this guy. Fauci saying, I'm trying to read this stuff. I'm trying to answer your questions. The reporter says, and if you read on the record, I need you to speak up so that I can get it on the record. Fauci says, okay, I'll keep my mouth shut and read it silently so it's not on the record. Oh man, he's throwing a hissy fit here. Fauci says, okay, I'll keep my mouth shut and read it silently so it's not on the record. He says, okay, what's the question, sir? Okay, he's getting very agitated. So the government says, the states say, Auchincloss emailed you saying, the paper you sent me says the experience would perform before the gain of function pause that have since been reviewed and approved by the NIH. Do you know what he was referring to then, Dr. Fauci? No, I don't exactly, but I'm assuming that I think correctly, appropriate of what I've been telling you for the last several minutes, is that what I wanted to get a feel was for the scope of what we were doing. Hugh's response was he looked at it and he said, everything's been reviewed and approved by NIH and Emily Emberling, and says that this was the understanding of the funding in China. It says that Emily is sure that no coronavirus work had gone through the P3 framework, which means it did not rise to the level of concern to get extra approval. She will try to determine if we have any distant ties to this work. All of these sentences and statements are compatible with that. I mentioned it to you a couple of times. This is the first time I've heard of it. So, okay. Now you see sort of how the rest of this is going. And if you just fast forward through this, basically what's going to happen is there will be additional I don't recalls, and there's a lot more to get through. So that is just the nuts and bolts of it. Now, there's another 600 pages or 450 pages or so that you can read through. We, of course, are not going to be able to cover it all here today, but that is what this looks like with Fauci. I mean, it's basically a bunch of I don't recalls. And we'll see if anything comes of it. But that's from Dr. Fauci. Now, we also have reaction from other individuals who are responding to this. Fauci, he says, you know, I'm not the most perfect person out there, but
he's perfect.
But he wouldn't redo anything if he had the opportunity. This is Rand Paul saying, yeah, Fauci is definitely not perfect. I can think of a lot of things that are problematic with his stewardship of America back during the coronavirus.
There is no public figure or public health figure that has made a greater error in judgment than Dr. Fauci. The error in judgment was to fund gain-of-function research in a totalitarian country, fund research that allowed them to create super viruses that in all likelihood accidentally leaked into the public and caused 7 million people to die. think about it. This is right up there with decisions, some of them malevolent or military, to kill millions of people. This accidental, but it goes to judgment. Talk about errors. You think he might apologize to the world for funding research that allowed super viruses to be created in a lab that was not properly outfitted for safety, that people were already reporting was dangerous, to support that type of research, and then to look the other way and say nothing to see here, and to cover it up. For the last 2 years, he's been covering his tracks, but we've got him red-handed, and he won't get away. Historically, he will be remembered for one of the worst judgments in the history of modern medicine.
Yes, he will. That's Dr. Anthony Fauci, and he can't even remember anything, as you can see. I don't recall. Things are very, very complicated for him. It's very difficult to remember things, especially when you are potentially facing the responsibility of deaths of millions. This is Ted Cruz, who is saying prosecution might be a foregone conclusion, or maybe an impossibility, rather, is what I think he says. This is Ted Cruz.
The way it works under our Constitution is that it is the executive branch that brings criminal indictments. It's the executive branch that prosecutes. So Dr. Fauci lied to Congress. He flat out lied to Congress when he said that no, the federal government had not funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute for Virology. Subsequently, the NIH has made clear that that was a lie, and that yet you know what? Merrick Garland and the Biden DOJ, they won't prosecute him. So when these clowns come in front of Congress and perjure themselves, I am sadly confident that Merrick Garland will not prosecute them.
No prosecutions, because they're doing their bidding, right? They're saying the things that they want them to say. They are selling the policy narratives that they want. And so there will be no repercussions for them, of course. But that, my friends, is it for our liar friend, Dr. Fauci, who got sat down for a deposition. Can't recall anything, wasn't really responsible for much, just really didn't really know much about anything. He met thousands of people, thousands of stuff came across his desk, and that's the end of the story. Will prosecution take place for his lies to Congress and to America? We'll have to wait and see. But that, my friends, is it for us for the day. I want to thank everybody who is a part of the show over from our friends at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have a short show today. We wrap things up a little bit quickly because it's Tuesday. But Alan Harkin is here on Rumble. He says, great to learn from your consistent hard work putting together complex facts and legalities for simple folk like me to understand. Well, Alan says, keep up your important work. Thank you. That's very generous of you. You know, I appreciate you being here, especially being over there on Rumble and jumping in on the Rumble chat. Now, I know the stream today was like potato garbage quality, and I honestly don't know why that is. Like, my speeds are pretty good. I'm going to have to call my ISP again and figure out what's going on. But thank you for that one that came in from our friend Alan Harkin. I'm grateful to be here with you. I'm glad that you are getting some value out of the program. I certainly love hanging out with you guys, and I learn a lot from you as the chat goes by and as we have our after parties. You guys share a lot of great things to me with me as well. Here today, we've got a couple other super chats. Eddie Oliver says, hey, Rob, whatever happened to Ray Epps? Well, I think he's still roaming around the country in a $1 million RV, escaping any criminal culpability for being whatever he is. That's what's happening. Good to see you, Eddie. Wendy Odell says, please do a Trump-related case at the Supreme Court. Which one? So one of them was rejected. I did 22-380, SCOTUS 22-380, Wendell Odell. If you want to send me an email on which one you'd like me to cover, I'd be happy to cover it. But I think I probably have already done the one you're talking about, which is 22-380. I did a full one, a full Rumble only video covering that case. So I'd refer you over there, Wendy. Thank you for that one. We also had Sledge and Wedge is here, says it's always crystal clear. I guess it's a reprimand. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a fresh copy of the stream. Okay. I have the whole thing recorded. It doesn't look like it was recorded in a potato. So I'm going to upload that right now and unlist this stream. So if you want to come back and watch it again, or, it'll be in better quality in about 30 minutes or so. I'll swap this one off, turn the clean copy on. But that, my friends, is it for us on the day. My locals friends, we'll come back. We'll probably do a morning follow-up after party, a morning live stream tomorrow, since we totally botched the live stream over there and we didn't have a chat or after party. I apologize to you guys that I X'd out our live chat over there and it didn't even solve the issue on YouTube. So I'll have to figure it out, but I'm going to go murder my internet router and then probably take a jackhammer to whatever are in those round, bins that are supposed to house internet connectivity equipment out there. It's not working, so I'm just going to go take it out. But that, my friends, is it for us on the show. Thank you to our watchingthewatchers.locals.com community and the amazing people over there. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. We also want to thank the sponsors of the program. Big shout outs to 4patriots.com. Get your survival food over at 4patriots.com. Nobody wants to starve to death. Nobody wants to freeze to death out there. Got to get your electricity, get your solar panels, get fortified because the world's a mess. Also, I am a lawyer. We have an amazing law firm over at the R&R Law Group. We're in Scottsdale, and we offer free case evaluations to good people who have been charged with crimes. 480-787-0394 is our law firm. Online, rrlawaz.com. We help good people with any type of criminal charge. A lot of traffic violations sort of happen this time of year as people are snowbirds are traveling around. We see criminal speeding. People go up to the Grand Canyon. They go up to Sedona. They go visit family in Tucson. Reckless driving, a lot of those. We also see some old town crimes, disorderly conduct, criminal damage, all of the assaults, all of the urinating in Publix, a lot of them these days. We can help with those and some of the more serious crimes as well. Any felony offenses, of course, very good at working with people who have a better path ahead of them, just need some help seeing it. We can make that happen. 480-787-0394, online at rrlawaz.com. Thank you to the mods who mod down the fort for us. Big shout outs go out to Vientikiss. We've got K-Bean. We've got Just Cause. We've got Lean in the house. We've got Playing Hooky, along with Ronnie Cole and Zulu. Our friend Geomancy is also in the house. Good to see you guys. All right, but that is it for us on the day. We are going to leave it right there, my friends. But I hope to see you right back here tomorrow so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a tremendous night, my friends. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.